Hello and welcome to DataCast Solutions, Statistics and Data Mining 101 using KNIME. In this next section of the class, we're going to talk about data transformations. And to begin with, I want to address the concept of unique columns. Categorical columns are those that take on a different value for every single row, or at least nearly every single row. And these columns identify, things like a customer ID, something that would uniquely identify them. So, for example, customer name, address, telephone number, customer ID. These columns are not going to be useful in our data mining analysis. And of course, you might ask why. Well, because they have no predictive value. They're not something that's going to provide you an indicator or a relationship to something else. And they also cause a big problem that we call overfitting. And what happens is your model tends to memorize data instead of predict it. So the more information, it begins to recognize those unique values as ways of identifying a behavior because customer ID did a certain thing. So we generally like to eliminate those columns from our data set where possible. Now, I was a DBA for many years, so let me tell you right now, sometimes the unique keys that we generate for like customer ID have a formula behind them that, for example, produces incrementing numbers, and that can be part of a predictive pattern. And sometimes keys are made up of other keys. For example, subfields. So a customer ID might have, the first column indicates if it's a national or an international customer, and then the second column of the key identifies the state they're in, and so on. So you need to make sure you understand the structure of the keys before you eliminate them, because there may be inherently useful and predictive data inside that key. In KNIME, the easiest way to get rid of columns is just with the column filter node. It allows you to just take columns out. So after you've done some exploratory analysis, as we showed in the last chapter, I might choose to filter some of my columns. Let's take a look at our sample data set and see how we might do that. All right, let's take a look now at the output of my continued donor data. I've altered it a little bit now. And let's take a look at the file table now. So I've now got this column called row ID, and I've got another column that I've added called donor ID. I'm interested in knowing right now, so I can see that I have 50,000 rows here. And when I look at the specifications for these, I can see that the lower bound is 1, there's 50,000, but I don't know if they're continuous. I don't know how many values I actually have. So KNIME provides a node for doing this called the value counter. So if I look in the node repository and down here under statistics, I'll add the value counter. And let's take a look and say, how many unique values are there for row ID? And I'm going to execute this, and I've got, this is all the unique values. There are 50,000. Since there were 50,000 in the input set, this is for each one of the values what I would see. So in other words, it's a unique value again. And I can also check on donor ID and say, is that unique? And I'll execute that. And I've still got 50,000 records in here. Now, for fun, if I were to take a look at, say, first name, which I had limited to just the first letter, it's just a single letter, which means when I look at that, I actually have A through here, so I've got 28 unique values for first name. So that is not a unique column. But I know that that is unique, and we did talk about coming back here and saying, is first name and last name, are they going to provide any predictive qualities? No, not likely. Now, typically address, I would say, would not. By address, I mean the actual street address, 123 Main Street. But things like city and state could actually, there might be differences in patterns depending on cities. Some cities are rich, poor, big, small, so there might be some value to keeping this information. So I'm not going to get rid of that. So all I'm finally going to add now here is the column filter node. And I'll drag this up. And I'm going to remove the row ID, the donor ID, first name, and last name. They're not going to provide me anything useful. And when we talk about uniqueness of columns now, that's all we're dealing with. That completes this chapter of the class. Feel free to move on to the next chapter.